Scholomance Academy is here, and it's time to review the Mage cards. Starting off, we have Trick Totem, a 2-mana 0/3 totem that will cast a random spell at the end of your turn that costs 3 or less. This card is tricky to evaluate. For starters, we know that totem synergy don't really exist in Mage, and this is a Mage Shaman card. But that being said, you play this, you get a 0/3 body and then a random spell, and already you got decent value, and it just keeps going, and your opponent maybe has to kill it. But it really depends on the kind of spell that you're going to get. Again, this is a random spell, so it'll be across all the classes. I think, we've seen the power of random spells through things like Puzzle Box, but I don't think this is going to be as strong. Again, maybe it can start to snowball early on if you get it. But, will it necessarily? Will it actually have the value? I'm going to give this, a 2 out of 5. I think it actually isn't very good. I think I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 in terms of meta relevance, and that I think people will experiment with it and then not be happy about it, and will eventually cut it. Moving along, we have Cram Session. This is a 2-mana spell that is draw 1, and it is improved by spell damage. That means if you had 1 spell damage, it would be draw 2 cards, and then 3 cards, etc. as it goes on. I think this card is actually pretty decent. All you need is to have 1 spell damage in play, and then you're basically getting Arcane Intellect for 1 less mana. And I think Spell Damage Mage actually will be a deck that exists. Whether it's tier 3 or tier 2, I'm not so sure, but I think this card is quite strong, and with the right conditions, it could be really, really, really good reload. If you have, say, 3 spell damage in play, all of a sudden it's 2 mana draw 4, which is absurd, and you could kind of combo with the Mage Legendary and other stuff like that. So I actually think this card is pretty good. For that reason, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 in card quality, and I think the Mage deck is going to be tier 2, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 in terms of meta relevance. Moving right along, we have Firebrand. This is a 3-mana 3/4, kind of reminds us of Flame Waker, except the Spell Burst effect will once again only work once. So this will deal 4 damage randomly split among all minions. It will not attack face. That's also important. I think this card is pretty solid. Maybe a 3 to 5 in terms of card quality. I'm not sure where you run this, which is my big problem. The 3-mana 3/4 stat line is good, and then the effect is quite good as well. Maybe in some kind of, spell damage deck with some mana cyclones and cheap spells, you kind of use this as an early way to get board presence. I could see it. I could also see it just not making the cut, and then that deck might be kind of a tight fit. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 in terms of card quality, and maybe a 2 out of 5 in terms of meta relevance, but I could be way off on this one. Next up, we have Worm Weaver. This is a 5-mana 3/6 spell burst, summon 2 1/3 mana worms. If you look at this as a 6-mana 5/12 worth of stats, where the attack keeps growing if you cast more spells, it looks pretty powerful, and I think it actually is pretty powerful. I think you would put this as the top end of a more aggressive tempo mage, like what I think Spell Damage Mage will be, and in that sense it would be quite good, just be a bit more to kind of break the back of your opponent. I don't think this is that great when you're behind, and that's why I think it would be in a deck that is a bit more aggressive in the first place. Obviously, it would be better against control if, you're not coming back from behind, but I think this is a pretty good card. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 and 4 out of 5 for meta relevance, so 4 across the board. Next up, we have Primordial Studies. This is a 1-mana spell that will let you discover a spell damage minion and discount your next spell damage minion by 1. I think this card is okay. I don't think it's good enough to make the cut in this spell damage mage that I'm thinking of, kind of like a tempo mage. I think this is probably around a 2 out of 5 in card quality. A lot of spell damage minions aren't going to be that great. There's some that are very strong, but you're also going to be looking through Kobold Geomancer or whatever that is, and that's just a terrible card. So I think this is a 2, and probably a 2 across the board. So not a great card, but it's alright. Next up, we have Brain Freeze, a 1-mana spell that will freeze a minion, and if you combo it, it will deal 3 damage to the minion. So it's kind of like a Frostbolt that can't attack face, and if you combo it, you get the 3 damage for half the mana cost, which is pretty good. And I think, in terms of cheap spell synergies, stuff like Mana Cyclone and Sorcerer's Apprentice, this could actually be decent. However, I'm still not sure this would make the cut over other cheap spells, and for that reason, I think I'm going to give this around a 3 out of 5 in terms of card quality, and a 2 out of 5 in terms of meta relevance. I think you'll pick other cards over this. That being said, I think it probably is a lot better in Rogue, so expect a higher rating in that class. Moving right along, we have Potion of Illusion. This is a 4-mana spell that lets you add 1/1 copies of your minions to your hand that cost 1. I think there's a lot of ways this card could be very strong. One obvious example would be to take Sorcerer's Apprentice, put 2 on the field, play this twice for 2 mana each, and then get 4 Sorcerer's Apprentice and combo that with Antonidas, and bam, you got an OTK where you're just fireballing over and over and over again. Very strong. However, I think where this actually might see play and be more likely is in a very Battlecry heavy deck like Highlander Mage. You know, this might be a sometimes card in Highlander Mage, and I think Highlander Mage will still be competitive. So, you know, 3 out of 5 for overall card quality, and maybe a 3 out of 5 for meta relevance. I think this card is pretty good, and the fact that it does synergize with Sorcerer's Apprentice might enable some kind of more control-y combo mage that could be a lot better too. So I'm open to the possibilities of this card. I think it's quite interesting. Next up we have Jandis Baerov, and this is a 5 mana 2/1 that will summon 2 5-cost minions, both random, and one of the minions will die if it takes any damage, and you get to secretly choose which one. I think this card is really, really strong. This is probably a 5 out of 5. I could see it getting nerfed. I think it's very easy. You could pick a Death Rattle for the card that gets taken down like by a single amount of damage. This is still hard to deal with in general, even if a card only has like the equivalent of 1 health. If you don't know which card that is, you're still likely going to have to trade the minions you have on board. You could also combo this with Conjurer's Calling. I think this is just like a 5 mana card that generally is going to summon way more than a 5/5 worth of stats, and just give you a lot of tempo, and that's all very strong. I think there are going to be times where you low roll and get 2/1s as well, because this is a 5-drop itself. But I think the vast majority of the time, this is going to be a crazy powerful card. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 in terms of overall card quality, and a 4 out of 5 in meta relevance. Next up, we have Lab Partner. I think this is another really powerful card. It's a 1 mana 1/3 with a spell damage +1, which is just a ton of stats and value for a single card. I think it's very easy to play this on 1 and curve into something like Cram Session on 2, which would draw you 2 cards, which is already pretty good. I think it synergizes with a ton of cheap spells. There's a ton of synergy within this Mage set. I just think you're just getting a lot for this card, and a 1 mana 1/3 is kind of the ideal stat line. So I expect to see this in plenty of decks. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 in terms of overall card quality, and a 4 out of 5 in meta relevance. Next up, we have Ross Frost Whisperer. This is a 5 mana 3/6 that will deal, at the end of your turn, will deal 1 damage to all enemies, which includes your opponent's face, and this is increased by spell damage, or improved by spell damage. This card is pretty crazy. If you think about Despicable Dreadlord, which I think was a 5 mana 4/5 that would do 1 damage to all your opponent's minions, that card was great. It was seen in a ton of decks. It was a very strong Warlock card. Really the only reason you didn't run it was because of Gul'dan summoning the demons you had, and you wanted more expensive demons. Just a very, very solid card. Saw it in Zoo and everything. And this is the same card with a little bit more health and the potential to do 2 damage, 3 damage, 4 damage with a deck that already has a ton of synergy for the spell damage stuff. So I think it's just a very, very solid card, and if it was only doing 1 damage, you'd already still consider it. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 in terms of overall card quality, and a 4 out of 5, as I think it will be in that spell damage deck in the top end, or even in a Highlander Mage deck. I think this is just a good card. Moving along, we have Mozaki Master Duelist. This card is nuts. If we're looking at nerf candidates, I could definitely see this being one. This is a 5 mana 3/8. After you cast a spell, gain spell damage +1. So why do I think this is so great? Well, let's start with the stat line. 5 mana 3/8. 8 health is actually a lot of health. That is quite difficult to deal with, even on turn 6 or turn 5. It's just a lot. Like, it's not easy to kill it immediately. However, I think where this card really shines is either as kind of a finisher for the spell damage deck, or even as a combo tool for the spell damage deck. For example, if we look at something like Malygos, which has spell damage +5 and often enables crazy combo decks, it's not hard to imagine a Sorcerer's Apprentice deck that plays cards like Magic Trick and Evocation and things like that to slowly build up the spell damage, and then refreshes it with Mana Cyclone, gets a bunch more spells, uses the 1 mana 1/1 that gets Arcane Missiles, and eventually just unleashes a bunch of Arcane Missiles that each time you cast it gives it more and more spell damage. By the time you're on like 6 or 7 spell damage, you're just doing like 10 damage per Arcane Missiles, which is ridiculous. So I think we could see really, really strong finishers with this card, and it's just already a solid stat line anyway, so you don't even need to worry too much about it dying if you want to get that value a little bit later. But I think you're most likely going to see it with, that Sorcerer's Apprentice synergy and just kind of going off in a single turn. Very, very powerful card, and I think it might even be nerfed. So actually I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 in both categories, because I think it's just going to define those decks. It's going to be so, so, so strong. So watch out for this card. Moving along, we have Combustion. This is a 3 mana card that deals 4 damage to a minion, and any excess damage deals to both neighbors. This is an interesting card. 3 mana, 4 damage is not amazing, but you could quickly see how positioning and spell damage can make this a lot more powerful. For example, if your opponent had a 1/1 and 2 3/3s on the both ends, you would deal 4 damage to it, which would mean you'd only need 1 to kill it, and the 3 damage on the other sides would kill both, which would give it a ton of value. So you have to be very, very mindful of how you position around this, and I think for that reason it's quite a decent card already. It deals well with small minions, and then with spell damage it becomes even more powerful. So I think it's like both a skill testing card and just a pretty powerful card in general, and I think we'll see it quite a lot in the future, even if you don't have a ton of spell damage. So I'm going to give this card a 4 out of 5 across both. It's quite strong. Next up, we have another powerful card for Mage. Mage is one of the bigger winners, I think, in this expansion. This is Devolving Missiles, which is a 1 mana spell that reads, shoot 3 missiles at random enemy minions that transform them into ones that cost 1 less. This is very comparable to Devolve, which was a 2 mana card that made all your opponent's minions cost 1 less. Very good for aggressive decks, allows you to get through taunts. This in some ways can be better than that card. If you have like 1 or 2 minions, it can devolve them. And it's just very, very powerful. It's cheap. You're going to want to run it in a variety of decks. I just think this is a very powerful card. 5 out of 5 in terms of overall quality, and 4 out of 5 in terms of meta relevance. Last but not least, we have Wand Thief. This is a 1 mana 1/2 combo discover a mage spell. I think this card is not great in Mage. I don't really think this slots in anywhere where you really want it. However, I do think this card is quite good in Rogue, and we'll get to that later. So I'm going to give this card a 2 out of 5 in overall quality, at least in Mage, and then a 1 out of 5 in meta relevance. I don't think you're going to see this Mage card really at all. And that's it for the reviews. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button. I'm going to be doing lots more reviews in the future for this, and also just the entire set coming up soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.